President Cyril Ramaphosa says Cabinet has accepted and taken responsibility for the July unrest. He was addressing the joint sitting of Parliament during the State of the Nation address at the Cape Town City Hall last night. Ramaphosa said they will address all the weaknesses identified by the expert panel appointed to review the country's response to the violent looting of public property and destruction of businesses, which saw over 350 people dead, with over 50 billion rand lost to the economy in July last year. To help us unpack some of the president's speech, we are now joined by Director of Rivonia Circle, Tessa Dooms. Tessa, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I know a lot was said, but I'm going to just jump straight into it and ask you what stood out for you. I mean, what was your analysis of it?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with what you led with. And that's a question of not only the July riots, but the way in which the president approached that issue and what it said about the broad speech. So the president pointed out that the expert panel report that he had commissioned had come out this week, of course, and that report, very detailed, goes through the actions of the executive, the actions of different actors in government during the July riots. And as the president said last night, the report says that Cabinet needs to take full responsibility for what happened in July last year. And in the SONA address, to respond to that, what the president does is he lays out that government is going to be looking at the bureaucrats involved, government's going to be looking at the systems involved and the processes, but doesn't make responsibility about the political actors in the room, about Cabinet itself. And that was indicative of many moments in the speech where you just didn't feel like government was taking political responsibility for where the country is right now. And even in the way that it casts forward, it still seems to be in the mode where it's outsourcing its thinking as government to agencies and task teams and private sector and everybody else. I mean, last night, for the first time, we heard this government say that it doesn't take responsibility for creating jobs. After speech after speech after speech, at least if you just think about the last 5 or 6 years of government saying it will create at least work opportunities. And so it just became a speech that felt like a hollowing out of the state in a different way by not having a political plan, a government-driven plan, and a lot of outsourcing of responsibilities that just didn't hold in terms of the political leadership the country needs.
I want to let's go back to the July unrest, because the president says that he's going to implement a lot of the findings from the report that came out. There are also expected to be some high-level changes. But what does that mean? I mean, let's begin with Commissioner Kekle Sitole. I mean, last night on the SABC, our journalist asked Police Minister Bheki Cele if he thinks it's time for Kekle Sitole to go. He didn't directly answer it, but what he did say was that he never sees him, he never works with him. In fact, he only works with his deputies. I mean, that was to quote what the minister was saying. So you can see that there is a breakup in the relationship there. Where does this leave the leadership like Minister Cele and Kekle Sitole?
Yes, I do think that, I mean, even if we just look at the Human Rights Commission's process around this, Commissioner Sitole has a lot to answer for. But we cannot be in a situation with this and with the state capture report, which was also mentioned in last night's speech, where the actions that are taken are only taken against the bureaucrats and people outside of the political responsibility in the country, and we don't see any action in the political realm. If our leaders that are elected to represent us as the people cannot take responsibility and have sanctions and censure when they are the ones who have made some of those decisions, or where balls have dropped, it's been in their hands, then what is the point of having them? Then we might as well just elect the bureaucrats. I think that another part of the speech that also shows this, that we really need to ask more of our political leaders and the people we elect into public office, is the question of monitoring and evaluation. And I mean, the one thing I can say about this speech positively is that it was definitely not more of the same, because we know that President Ramaphosa's speeches have often been criticized for being too futuristic, too dreamy. And in this speech, we actually got a lot of deadlines being set for the future, a lot of plans, a lot of numbers about what's going to happen. But what we didn't see was a lot of monitoring and evaluation. And again, I'll come back to the question about youth unemployment. Last night, we heard a lot of future numbers come up. These are the future numbers that we intend to hit in terms of youth unemployment and particularly the public sector programs for it. But no M&E on the 19 billion rand that Treasury said it was going to spend in the President's office on the youth employment program in the last few years. No feedback on whether the jobs that have been created through the SA.mobi platform are sustainable jobs, are quality jobs, whether those young people are going to be absorbed into those industries, what's working, what's not working. And again, we need a more workmanlike approach that doesn't only cast vision, but also gives us a real state of where government is at, what it's doing well, and what it intends to do better.
Yeah, let's move on to the job creation issue, because that was something. And when we saw the reaction from the DA, John Steenhuisen, coming and saying, "Well, finally, the president is listening to us." This was like a DA State of the Nation address. So, giving his party all credit for what the president had to say. I don't know if that should be the case, but nonetheless, that's what he had to say. But the president coming forward, and you mentioned it a bit earlier in your answer, talking to the fact that the president coming through and saying, well, it's not government that creates jobs, it's the private sector. And that was quite a comment to make. A lot of people commenting on that and saying, okay, well, now you've taken leaps and bounds and jumped from that to this. And you've come in and said, we're going to stop all this red tape. We're going to try and implement that. We've now got somebody to head that up, and a department that is going to actually fall in the office of the presidency. I mean, these are questions you have to ask yourself as well. I mean, where is this taking us? I mean, are we just going to start seeing a lot more privatization of everything?
Yeah, it's a real double-edged sword, because of course we know that government cannot actually create in terms of employ everybody in the country. But that's not what job creation that's driven by government actually means. And I think that was a sleight of hand by the president to say, government can only employ so many people and then the rest need to come from business and the private sector. When in fact, government doesn't only create an enabling environment, for example, through policies and regulation. And we saw last night the regulation focused on the informal economy, a much needed intervention that has been long overdue to deregulate the informal economy in ways that don't make it difficult for people to continue to do survivalist trades and scale that up and nurture it. So that's absolutely necessary. But government also does need to take responsibility for how they're going to start guaranteeing that jobs will be created in this environment. It does have to take responsibility for public-private partnerships and the way it's going to use government's levers to ensure that the private sector do the right thing and don't just focus on profits, but actually focus on the creation of jobs. And this is where I think the DA might be cautious about saying that they support this, because where government did step up last night and in the last 2 years, particularly because of COVID, is they're talking a lot more about public sector driven initiatives in terms of work opportunities and work placement. So we spoke about the social fund last night, we spoke about the presidential stimulus initiatives, and all of those are about health, they're about social security, they're about education, and getting more people engaged in public service and paying them for that. So there are a wide range of things that can be done by government. And I hope that the government does not see this as an opportunity to take its foot off the pressure that it's put in the last 2 years and just abdicate responsibility to the private sector. That's not what an enabling environment is about.
Yeah, certainly. And, one can't help but think as well that it appears that the president wants to have control over everything and under his sight, and also bringing in business to help. So we see the appointment of Sipho Nkosi, who is dubbed the cutter of the red tape now. One would think that already should belong to the Department of Small Business, and this is something that should already be in place. But now he's had to appoint somebody else to try and assist with something like this. Is this a lack of faith in his government? I mean, do you think that this in a way is showing, right, okay, I'm taking things into my own hands, I'm bringing in my own people, you can all stay there, but I'm going to do it my way?
In a column I wrote recently, I said that we run the danger in this country of electing public officials and then giving them no work to do because we don't have faith in their abilities. And it would seem after the president's speech last night that he doesn't have faith in his cabinet's abilities either. And so he's bringing more things into his own office. In the last year alone, we've seen infrastructure going into the president's office. We've seen youth unemployment in the president's office. We've seen state security move into the president's office. And now we're seeing the cutting of red tape in the president's office, something as minuscule and micromanaging as that. And that says that the president is going to maintain his cabinet for political reasons, but he's not actually going to expect of them to do work. And the danger with that is if government is not expected to do work, if politicians who are elected are not expected to do work, then we can't hold them responsible when things go wrong. And I think the president must take into account that we are asking him to do what he alone can do. His prerogative to hire and fire means that his cabinet must be held accountable. And I think Julius Malema said it last night when he gave his commentary, is that we can say, yes, Parliament must hold the executive to account, and that's great. But the person who can hold them to the greatest account is the President of the Republic. And if he puts the interest of his own political considerations above service delivery to the country, that will be a shame to his legacy.
Yeah. Also a big concern is a bloated presidency. With so much now falling under the presidency, yes, it may look like a great thing, and it may look like, the president wants to keep an eye, a very close eye on these very important aspects. But I mean, can it honestly have success that way, with too much responsibility being under him and not utilizing the others that he does have, which we clearly felt last night he has very little faith in, which you've already said?
I mean, there are two outcomes to this that we need to keep our eye on. The one is the idea that now we have government being not only brought around the president, but it also means that things become even more siloed than they are already in the system. And we don't need just, small projects. You can't run a country of 60 million people by project management alone. You need an entire system of government that works. And the president's speech was going reasonably well until he got to the point where he talked about strengthening the capability of the state. Because unfortunately, unless you pull that lever properly, unless you actually strengthen the state's capability across the board to deliver, you actually cannot do anything that you promised to do in that speech last night. And the president cannot fool himself into believing that he can, number one, create enough task teams of external government people to solve these problems. And these task teams are not free, by the way. And number two, that he can micromanage every one of the country's problems himself. It is just impractical. And what it's going to lead to is not only the political considerations that I spoke about earlier, but it's an insidious hollowing out of the state that by the time the president leaves, will there be departments that just don't have capacity to perform because all of that capacity has now been built in the president's office rather than in the state machinery itself?
Yeah. I want to just quickly touch on one or two more issues before we get into the news bulletin. I know there is so much to unpack. The issue around the basic income grant, that was, I think a lot of people were hoping to hear a little bit more about that. The president holding out on that. However, extending the 350 Rand grant that is going to go on, the monthly social relief of distress grant, for another 12 months. And also just in general, the speak of the amount of monthly support, 10 million receiving this 350, 18 million grants such as pension, foster, childcare grants. I mean, this is very heavy on the state. Talk to us about what was announced last night in terms of continuing these kind of grants.
So as you said, the president did announce, and I think rightfully so, that the 350 disaster relief grant around COVID will be extended until March 2023, because it's an intervention that has shown that it at least raises, especially people who are of working age in an economy that has 50% or so unemployment, raises them just outside of being in abject poverty. And so it's a necessary intervention. But where the president really had one of these big kick the can down the road moments was in not being firm about where we are in terms of basic income support. And I say basic income support because presidency government has actually gone on major initiatives in the last few years to actually cost and scope the exercise of basic support for people who are between the ages of 18 and 59. And the Taylor Commission report had been revived from about 20 years ago that Professor Taylor had done, and the National Planning Commission in 2020 presented a comprehensive report on how feasible it is, and the ANC took that on. And so that should have been in the report or in the SONA yesterday. But even government put together another team that was led by Professor Alex van der Heever last year that gave government multiple options about what is possible. So the fact that the president spoke about that as if he doesn't have information about what's wrong, what's possible, what's needed, was very concerning, because that says there's no political will, even when you have the solutions in your hands. And I won't go into what those solutions are broadly, but I think it's disingenuous to say the country doesn't have the money when we haven't actually spoken through what some of those options are, because those options are not just straightforward, increase tax and then give out money. Those options are about the multiplier effect that giving money in the hands of people can have, the business opportunities, the local economy opportunities for it, the ways in which you can cut costs in different places that can regenerate into the state. There are so many things that indicate it is actually possible if there's will. And I think that there might be an indication there is no will to get some of the stuff done.
Yeah. Tessa, we're into news time, but I'm not going to let you go, because this is, of course, our top story as well. I want to ask you one last question about this movement that the president gave us last night. So he says we're not going to only be smoking it, we're going to be using these products for a lot more things and to develop the industry, the cannabis industry. 130,000 potential jobs to be created. The Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, they're already farming it and saying that this is something that's going to be big business for South Africa. I think he used the words, we're going to take it to higher levels. Yeah, excuse the pun. Well, what did you make of this, Tessa? Some opportunities. I mean, that was one mentioned. Anything else we should have seen that perhaps escapes us?
Yeah, I think that was an important opportunity. I think we have lagged behind even our local counterparts like Lesotho in just making it easier for people to get the licenses. Those licenses are like, cow's teeth or pig's teeth. I don't know what the saying is in this country, because we really just need a way to accelerate that. But another opportunity in that space, but also in all of the master plans, as you call them, the sectoral master plans, there seems to be a lot of focus on kind of jobs at the very basic primary manufacturing and primary economic level. But we need to start talking about upscale, up the value chain. And where do we start creating more opportunities, not only for packaging things, for reselling, for forward creating of markets in different parts of the country, in different places. And so we need a value chain approach to these opportunities rather than only seeing the primary opportunities that are in place. That's one of them, but I think there are many others where we can build full value chain sectors rather than just focus on those important starting points.
Tessa, thank you so much. I know we've only just touched the surface of what was said last night, but thank you for your analysis. Director of Rivonia Circle, Tessa Dooms.